Hi everyone, Shamus from Cosmic Blast Media here, back again with another video for you. This time I've got a book review. It's Joe Estevez, Wiping Off the Sheen. Now, if you're a fan of On Cinema and Decker like me, then you'll definitely know Joe Estevez. He is one of the greatest parts of that whole series. You might know him as President Davidson from Decker. And I think that his performance elevates the entire series, in my opinion. He brings an air of legitimacy. He is an actor with a great track record in independent film. He's been acting for years and years, and the life that he brings to On Cinema and our universe is really, I value it a great deal. So I decided to pick up his book to learn more about the man, and I can honestly say that after reading this book, it gave me so much more respect for him, and I already had so much beforehand because just from the series we get to know that Joe is just a great man. He's very kind, very gentle, very easygoing, but he also can stand up for himself. He knows that it's important to be your own man, to stand up for what you believe in. He has a very high values, and he values things like morality. He values things like independence from the man, as he calls it, and I'll give you some more examples of what I mean by that, because this book, and just so you know, it's told in an interview style. So the interviewer asks Joe the questions, and then he answers in his own voice. So what you get here is just the train of thought of Mr. Joe Estevez. Very little editing in this book. And it's very short, but it is a good read all the way through. You really get a feel for Joe's personality, and it's hilarious because he's a very funny guy. He loves to improvise. That's why he is so attracted to the world of On Cinema. He loves improvisation. He loves the freedom to express himself, and he's very honest. He's a very honest person, and he goes into the art of acting here. He goes into his method, which is he's very vulnerable when he's acting. Alright, he lets it all out, he lets all his emotions out, and in return he expects that the product that he's making says something about society, because he is a true artist. He wants to elevate his art in any way he can through his performance. So he has had his trials and tribulations in his life, which he details in this book as well. So going into the book, I wanted to get a good idea of who Joe Estevez is, kind of his personality, and really I just wanted a good entertaining read, and in all honesty, this book achieved all of that. It was very quick to read, but it was also very funny, very entertaining, and I'm very glad I picked it up, and I can't wait to read it again. So that is the basic review of the book. So I'm going to go into my favorite parts, give you a little taste of what the book's about. Going into the book, I also wanted to know more about his relationship with his brother, Martin Sheen, and we get a good idea of that as well in the book. He goes into his relationship with not only his brother, Martin Sheen, but also Charlie Sheen as well. So we get a good insider view of not only the relationship there, but also the inner workings of that side of Hollywood that he's on, kind of the lower echelon. Not exactly A-list, maybe B-list or C-list. So we get a feel for what that world's about, and we get a feel for Joe Estevez as a person, and he narrates the whole thing, and his point of view is at the same time hilarious, but at the very same time very informative and very eye-opening into how that world works. So it's something that I really appreciated from this book. So I'm going to read to you a few selections from the book detailing. First off, I'm going to tell you all about Joe's philosophy, because Joe has a lot of opinions about spiritualism, positive thinking, and what films should say. Films are an art in his opinion, and they shouldn't just cater to the lowest common denominator. They shouldn't just be violent and pornographic. They need to say something about the plight of man. So I'm going to be going into that, and also how he views society and the morality of society, and how he feels that there's a certain corruption that comes bubbling up from under the surface sometimes. So I'm going to be going into that first, and then I'll go into some more other aspects of the book, like I said, his relationship with Martin Sheen, as well as his alcoholism, and kind of the trajectory of his career. So let's dive into Joe Estevez, Wiping Off the Sheen. Now, one of my favorite takeaways from reading this book is that Joe Estevez has a real zest for life. He lives life to the fullest every single day because his philosophy is that you've only got one life to live, so you might as well live it up. And that is reflected in the work that he does and just his overall personality. He really comes across as a very optimistic person with a lot to give. So I picked out a few select parts from the book that I'll read you that really illustrate this point. Joe Estevez says, "You were born with a good conscience. Listen to it. Listen to that beating of the heart. Listen to that spiritualism that is the world. Listen to the angels. Listen to the leprechauns. Listen to that little dance that's in your mind. Dance barefoot in the street. Rip your shirt off. Soak up this life because, man, it passes so short and all you're left with is regrets and a bank account that the banks are probably going to go belly up and steal all your money anyway like they just did. So live, live! We're here to live. We're here to use ourselves up." He's very concerned about making the most out of your life and not letting your inhibitions hold you back. But on the other side of the spectrum, he is also very concerned about the forces of evil, the forces of good. He's a very good person, and he's very concerned about society and the direction that our society is going in. He feels that there's a certain corruption bubbling up under the surface that is almost becoming mainstream. And one of his objects of ridicule in his example is Paris Hilton. So the interviewer asked him, "What don't you like about Paris Hilton?" Joe Estevez says, "I'm sorry. I think she's a force for evil. I use evil and maybe I should substitute that word as a force for negative. People are rewarded for being negative. She's being rewarded for giving head to a guy in a home movie porn film, and now she's on top of the world and she's worshipped. That's not what your society should be about. We should say to that young lady, that's not what you're on this planet for. But she's celebrating herself in all this materialism, and we are all about this materialism. I'm watching TV the other night, and these commercials come on. And what do these commercials have to do with what I was just watching? Well, okay, they help pay for what I was just watching, but wait a minute. I pay for my TV, I pay for my cable, I pay for my electricity. Shouldn't that have been paid for? I am basically a socialist. And I don't know where that became a bad word, and I don't know when in the hell capitalism became a good word. People don't understand. Capitalism, a capitalist here in this country and every other place around the world, they owe their allegiance to no country. They owe their allegiance to one thing, making money. And they will take every fucking penny you've got, and then kick you to the curb and then go to somebody else that's got money. It's supposed to be a good thing, as if our founding fathers who signed the Declaration of Independence welcome in capitalism as a way to run the society. That's not the way it was, and that's not the way it should be right now. So, Joe has a lot of strong opinions, and I can't say I disagree with him. So, let's see. There's a few other sections that I wanted to give out, but here's one that's Joe Estevez was asked, if Charlie has tiger blood, what kind of blood does Joe Estevez has? Because Charlie Sheen is Joe Estevez's uncle, or Joe Estevez is Charlie Sheen's uncle. So Joe Estevez replies that Joe Estevez is a pussycat. He doesn't piss tiger, so I don't piss tiger blood, I piss cat's milk. I'm a pussycat. So that's just how Joe Estevez looks at himself. He's a very carefree man. Harmless, totally harmless, although he does have certain parts in the book where he does put his foot down. He thinks that it's important to stand up for yourself. There are times in his career where he has been stiffed. He has not been paid his proper due after work has been already done. So he gives a few examples of that as well in the book, where he has to confront people to get his proper payments. And that really sucks, because Joe Estevez is an honest man. He does an honest day's work, and he deserves to be compensated for that work. And it really sucks to hear stories about him being ripped off, but that's the life of an actor, and that's what shaped him into having all his moral values that he has. So another person that he really went after was Quentin Tarantino. So Tarantino makes him sick. So Joe Estevez disagrees with Quentin Tarantino's whole philosophy. Here's a guy with incredible freaking talent, man, and he makes Grindhouse and this violent shit. And I know that's what makes money, but give us a piece of art, man. Because you got the talent. God's given you the talent to talk through film. Get some balls and chutzpah, man! Give us something that speaks to the heart of man, to the compassion, to the spirit of man that can raise us above ourselves. We were talking about Don McLean the other day and that we're going to see in April coming to town. This guy's a great, marvelous poet. This guy's brilliant. He's a wordsmith, and my God, the images that he can paint with his words is just marvelous. The images that Tarantino can paint with his film is just marvelous, but he chooses to appeal to the lower instincts of man. Shame on him. Fuck him! That's not what movie making should be about. That's using the great talents God gave you to make money, not to make a difference. We're given these talents to make a difference, to make the plight of man a little bit better. We're artists. That's what our obligation is here, not to make all the money we can and hide out in Malibu. Let the rest of the world go to hell in a handbasket. Well, just goes to show that Joe Estevez cares about art, he cares about being an artist, and he cares about his art elevating the status of man. He wants his art to say something and to make the plight of man a little easier. So I can say with great confidence that the work that he has done has definitely made my life a lot happier, just reading this book and hearing all his straight opinions about stuff. And he's very honest, he is very funny, and he is very go with the flow, because as you can see, he doesn't really think out, he just kind of lets it flow out, and what you get is a very honest account of a very interesting man with a lot to say. So for this next section of the review, I'm going to be taking a look at Joe Estevez's relationship with his brother Martin Sheen, because that's kind of his claim to fame, really, even though in my opinion he's a much better actor and he's a much more interesting person. So let's, I selected a few different sections from what he had to say about his brother, so I'll just read you a few of the sentences I picked out. So he says, in regards to my brother Ramon Estevez, better known under his stage name Martin Sheen, back in the day when we were kids, he was 6-7 years older than I am. He was such a charismatic guy that I really looked up to him. I wanted to be like him. I admired his qualities as a human being. I remembered him going off to New York when he was 18. I was 12 and my brother John was 15. We made him one of these good luck things. We went down to the train station and watched him board the train and go off to New York. I felt in my heart that day that Ramon Estevez left. He never really came home again. He became international. He didn't belong to Dayton anymore. He belonged to the world. And as close as I thought we were when we were growing up, we have never been close since I decided to become a professional actor. I do not know who this guy Martin Sheen is. He seems like a good guy. He has done a lot of good, but he is not the Ramon Estevez I grew up with in Dayton, Ohio. So, as you can see, it's a little splintered, their relationship, and he doesn't even consider Martin Sheen the same person he grew up with. And then he goes into detail about there was a very unfortunate incident in which Joe Estevez, he narrated a commercial for the NRA, and Martin Sheen called him out publicly. He had a press conference, basically derogatory. He was making claims against Joe Estevez, very derogatory claims that says that he was being duped into doing the commercials. But then when Joe Estevez confronted him about the fact, Martin Sheen kind of backed off and he said, "Oh, I didn't have anything to do with that." And Joe Estevez says that really hurt him, and it really hurt his relationship with him. And then later on in the book, he recounts another story because he and Martin Sheen and Charlie Sheen were in the same film together, but Martin Sheen and Charlie Sheen didn't even know that Joe Estevez was in it until he showed up on set. And he says that they pretty much ignored me. Martin was not very kind to me. I had my daughter Amanda with me. The producer invited me, my brother, and Charlie to dinner. Neither one of them showed up. I was the only one who showed up for the dinner. We never got together. Nobody came to say, "Hey, Joe, let's do some dinner or hang." It was nothing. Let me say this, though. Charlie was going through some difficult periods at the time with the things that Charlie goes through. My brother was preoccupied with that. That could have been one of the reasons why. I'm usually a pretty fun guy to be around on set, and I was no different with this film. I made a lot of friends on that set, and I still have them to this day. I enjoy doing that movie. And I enjoyed There's Something on My Resume Where I've Worked with My Family, but I think the term cold shoulder comes to mind. Wow, so obviously they don't really consider Joe Estevez part of their family. Joe Estevez does go into detail about some of his demons as well, which going back to his early days with he had some alcohol problems, so maybe that was a contributing factor, but definitely a divide in the Estevez clan. And Martin Sheen seems to have some sort of an issue with Joe Estevez, which really sucks because Joe Estevez is a great man, and Martin Sheen, he can fuck off because Joe Estevez is an amazing person, and he actually cares about the mankind. He cares about humanity and making a statement, elevating the status of humanity with his art. So, Joe Estevez, you are my hero, and Martin Sheen, you're a bad man, in my opinion, until you make up with your brother because he's a great human being. So one of the most interesting parts of his book was early on when he was talking about his early struggles with alcoholism and how his reputation as a drunk really hurt his early career when he was first starting out, because he had some big opportunities with some major players in Hollywood like Francis Ford Coppola, as well as Sidney Lumet on Dog Day Afternoon, as well as many others. But he lost a lot of opportunities because he was a victim of alcoholism. So I selected a few things that really illustrate this. So he was asked, what did alcohol do to your career at that time when you were first starting out? And Joe says, when I first came out here, I was in the big arena. I was doing auditions with people I'd seen on TV, and I was incredibly intimidated. I thought, oh my god, these guys, they must be great, and I'm just this amateur actor from Dayton. Of course, you can take care of that with a little bottle of courage. John Barleycorn, you're right up there with them. When I first came out here, it hurt me dearly. I remember reading Drunk for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I remember reading Drunk for Dog Day Afternoon and a couple other big films. I was getting out on the big projects. I did a film with Burt Reynolds, Gene Hackman, and Liza Minnelli called Lucky Lady, which was down in Mexico. The three biggest stars in the world at that time, all of them. This is way back in 1974. They were all making $1 million, which was unheard of back then. I had a nice little part in that movie. I was 2 weeks in Mexico. I spent that 2 weeks absolutely blitzed out of my mind drunk. So you do that, you pay your dues for it, and Hollywood is a very, very small town. So that reputation spreads. And then he details, because Joe Estevez was in Apocalypse Now for a little bit, because Martin Sheen was the star of that movie, but Martin Sheen had a little falling out with Francis Ford Coppola. So they brought in Joe Estevez to do some additional narration and do a few stand-in scenes. So then he details his experience on that film, in which he was very drunk at the time as well. So he says, let's see. And so this is him initially going on the plane trip to the Philippines to shoot Apocalypse Now. It seemed like a matter of hours, and I asked for a script to Apocalypse Now, and an AD or a PA came over with Heart of Darkness, the book. So I'm reading that on the plane, and of course I get to the Philippines and I'm blitzed. I'm lit like a Christmas tree, and I'm afraid to introduce myself to Francis Coppola. It was an opportunity few actors have in a lifetime, and there I had it, and I was pissing it away. I worked with some big names, Fred Forrest, Larry Fishburne, great cast. So I'm just showing up to the movie world and that I'm a drunk. And then he, one of the more cringeworthy parts of the book is when he's detailing his experience doing narration with, it was basically just him and Francis Coppola together, but he couldn't get it together because he was too drunk. So he's recording narration, and he says, about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I can barely stand up, and there are some Vietnamese words that I just could not get my tongue around. I just could not pronounce them. Now I'm spending the day at the time, which is still one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. At the time, the most powerful producer-director in the world. I'm spending the day with him. I mean, any actor worth his salt would have gotten 2 or 3 promises, right? And I'm pissing it away. I'm just showing the most powerful man in Hollywood I'm a useless drunk. Got some talent, but I'm a drunk. So these words, I can't pronounce them, and Francis gets up to me and he looks me in the eye, and he's about a finger length away from my face, nose to mouth, and he says, "Can't you say the words, Joe? Can't you just say the fucking words?" I literally felt myself shrink. I literally felt myself shrink inside my body from the embarrassment and the humiliation. I had never been so straight on humiliated in my life. Those words spoke volumes. He was saying, "Can't you leave the booze alone enough for a part of the day?" So, Joe Estevez did get sober as a result of that. I've been sober now for 30-some years, and there's an old adage that the best day I had drunk is worse than the worst day I had sober. That's garbage. I had some great days drunk. I had a marvelous drunk. The Philippines, 3 months. It was more than 3 months. Incredible drunk. And I'd hate to say I loved every minute of it, but I did. And I think I was even drunk at the airport going back to the United States. So for me, it was a great experience. So there you have it. I mean, mixed feelings on the whole alcohol thing, but obviously it created a lot of problems in his life. But that's part of the book that I found very interesting, and he has a lot more to say about that. So if you find that interesting too, pick up the book immediately. Now, like I mentioned before, Joe Estevez's career has put him alongside some very shady characters because, like I said, he works in very low-budget productions in Hollywood, and these are B, C-level films, and he's dealt with some shady characters throughout his career. So I picked out a few select parts that I found pretty interesting. Like, he did this film in 1993 called Beach Babes from Beyond. Now, so he did the movie, right? And the movie is just a straight, goofy comedy. But then, it turns out that the director did 2 different versions of the film. And his name is David DeCocteau, or something. And turns out he used 2 different director names. And the one director was for the goofy comedy, but then he has a pseudonym, Ellen Cabot, and that's his softcore porno director name. So he took this movie and he inserted a bunch of sex scenes into it without Joe's knowledge or consent and re-released it as a porn film. And as we know from the previous things I've read, Joe Estevez did not appreciate that too much, and he was very pissed off about it. So that's just one example of these filmmakers really taking advantage of Joe Estevez and his honest, hard work. And then he did another movie called Double Blast, which was also in the Philippines, and he had some interesting things to say about that. I did a movie in the Philippines called Double Blast. It was a pretty good movie. So I was over there, and I was sober, and I was surrounded by all this poverty, and I started jogging. And I still jog to this day. And I would leave the hotel room with monies in my pocket, and I would give it to the kids. Back then, I was a fast jogger, so I would give it to them, and then I would jog, and they couldn't keep up with me. Otherwise, if I would have just given it to them, I would have been mobbed, and so I made kind of a practice of that every day. But the incredible poverty in the Philippines and the children, there's a garbage dump over there that was continuously on fire. And the families live on this garbage dump. They live on this garbage dump and they eat the garbage from the garbage dump. Families live on the side like mud huts built into the sides. And there's so many people, there's so little room. Even middle-class people live in shacks. There's nothing there. You can't save a whole country. So I was constantly sad there because I'm a bleeding heart in Manila and going out seeing the poverty every day. And about 6 months later from the same producer, I got an offer to go back to the Philippines and I couldn't do it. I just said thanks, but no thanks. I've worked in 12 different foreign countries and the Philippines is far and away the poorest of them all. These people had nothing. Nothing. They subsist on garbage. Wow. So Joe has a bleeding heart and he really cares about the people in these countries. He even gave money to children in need. So that's more than you can say about Charlie Sheen, Martin Sheen, or whoever else. And he also goes into detail. There was one part where he describes there was this director who was yelling at his crew. He was a very immature director, and Joe Estevez, being the only name on the project, decided to stand up for himself. So He says, "We got in a real screaming match, and I was acting the whole time. I wasn't really that angry, but I knew I had to do something, and it was like, after I did that, everybody was, yeah, okay." He had it coming, and it took the tension right out of it. But I think as an actor and as a human being, you've got to speak up, and you've got to speak out. I think too many actors and people that are just in the public eye and have a place to say something, they just take the money and run. And they got to understand that with that position comes responsibility. We're here for such a short time, and when you get to my age and if you sold yourself out, that's very painful to go home every night and sleep knowing that you've sold your soul. I'm human. I've done some things I shouldn't have, and I should have done some things that I didn't, but I think overall I stood up for myself, and I'm proud of the way I handled myself. To this stage of the game, anyway. Wow, so he's a real stand-up guy, and I really respect all that he has to say and everything he's gone through in life. He still holds his head up high and does things for the greater good. So we should all aspire to be more like Joe Estevez. So to wrap things up, as you could probably tell by now, I love the book, and I think that everyone should go out and buy a copy immediately. Anyone in the On Cinema family especially, because you're going to want to know everything you can about Joe Estevez. He's a great man, and we all know and love him from the Oscar specials, from Decker, from On Cinema itself, but when you get to really read into what goes on in his mind, you get to really appreciate him that much more. So I'm going to leave you with this last little section I picked out. It's probably the funniest section in the book. And the interviewer asked him, "What are your thoughts on little people actors?" So this is what Joe had to say. "It's kind of like working with animals. I don't like them. It's just an ego thing. You can be doing the most brilliant scene that you've ever done in your life, and if you're sharing that scene with the little people, then you are invisible. Totally invisible. The audience says, 'Oh, look at the cute little... Oh, he's picking his ass. Oh, isn't that something?' Movie makers and producers are abusing and using them just because they are little people. Having said that, there are some little people who are terrific actors. Peter Dinklage is phenomenal. It's tough enough to be a little person, but to be taken seriously as an actor... God bless him, the guy is terrific. He deserves everything that he got and more. It's a tough life they have, but I'd rather they be in someone else's scene. However, I don't want them to be overlooked." So, pretty funny little slice of Joe's mind there. Obviously, he was talking off the cuff, and when you talk off the cuff, sometimes you say some silly things, and I'm sure he doesn't really think that little people are animals. He was just kind of being funny. So, and there's a lot of different parts like that in the book that I really loved. So you're going to want to pick up this book immediately and add it to your book collection, add it to your On Cinema collection. I know I will. So thank you so much for watching. Go pick it up now, and next week I will be reviewing D. Thomas's book. So you can look forward to that as well. Thank you so much, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want. So thank you so much.